Revolution Radio.
The Intercity by amadpainter, a.k.a. T.R. Becker. River Tones looked out the window of his living room. It was still dark out, but the sun would be up soon. The city streets were empty, as they had been since the quarantine had gone into effect over 2 months ago. There were a few other lights in the buildings across the street, so he was not the only one awake. The quarantine did little to change his life. He had worked from home for the last few years, being a network expert, but had gone out to do things at night. There was one Italian restaurant he was fond of going to for dinner about once a week. He also missed the bowling league he was a member of. He didn't have much of a social life, but he was happy with it. He had not been interested in networking when he merged with Mona, the city's artificial intelligence. The merge was no big deal, nor was it a real merge like it sounded. Mona would tap into the subconscious mind and alter the character in some ways. Violence, cruelty, and sexual perversions were almost unheard of after the merge. It would show what type of job the person was best suited for, so the proper training could begin. This had worked for the last 500 or 600 years, maybe even longer. He didn't know for sure. His apartment's voice said, "River, I see you have not been sleeping well the last few nights, and your fluid analysis shows high levels of testosterone. Maybe you should visit one of the city's pleasure centers. We're under quarantine, remember? How could it not know this?" "Yes, but given your position, Mona would consider a visit essential." He almost laughed. Essential? A trip to a pleasure center? He wondered just how many essential visits there have been approved. He turned from a window and said, "No, thank you. I'm fine, really. I'll have breakfast number 3, please." He went to the bathroom and took his shower. When he came back out, the niche in the kitchen opened. His breakfast and a hot cup of coffee was there. He picked it up and went to his desk. "Run news feed, please." The words began to run across the wall. There was nothing new there, he thought, as he ate. The quarantine death toll had gone up some, but it was leveling off. Just what the pathogen was, Mona had never told the people. He found this strange, but it was not his place to question her decisions, only to do as she said. A drone flew by the window carrying what he thought was a box of groceries. Most of the deliveries would be done by noon each day. He was not due for his till tomorrow. The sun was up now, and the sky held some clouds. He wondered if it would rain sometime today. He liked the rain. It would clean the city and make the air smell so good to him. Right now, they were not allowed to open the windows, or he would have one open by now. He took his tray back to the niche, returned to his desk, and as he sat down, said, "Computer, please." The screen rose up out of the desktop, and the keys showed in front of it. He typed in his password, and the computer said, "Password, facial recognition accepted." The screen lit up to the city's homepage. There was nothing new there, he saw. He checked his email. There was nothing of importance. He did have an email from the bowling league telling him that the playoffs would take place the Friday after the end of the shut-in. This made him feel good. They were up for the city's championship. He had never been one for playing games on the net, as most of the young people did. He always found them a waste of time for the most part. He could have activated the voice recognition, but he didn't care for it. He hit the tab for his work site, but it didn't come up. Instead, a page came up that had large red letters. It read, "You have been locked out. Please stand by for further instructions." What the hell, he thought? Locked out? Why would that be? He tried to click back to the home page, but it would not go. It was locked down. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked the room. "No, sir, but I just received a message to expect company in the next few minutes." What, he thought? Company? Somebody was coming here? No one had the authorization to be out during the quarantine other than the drones. He could think of nothing he could have done to get locked out of his work site and prompt a visit from someone. He stood and looked out the window at the empty street. It began to rain lightly. It was summertime, so the rain would be warm, the kind he would have liked to take a walk in. A car turned onto the street. It slowly moved down the street and stopped right below him. The back door opened. A man in a black hat and raincoat stepped out and entered the building. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. He didn't say anything as the door opened on its own. The man standing there was 6 foot tall, raincoat over one arm, holding his hat. He was in his 50s, with short white hair, and was smiling at him. "Mr. River Tones?" he asked in a deep voice. All he could do was nod his head. "I'm Inspector Darren, and I'm sure you have a few questions." He entered, and the door closed behind him. He must have had control of the home's AI in some way. "What is this all about, Inspector?" He hoped his voice did not show how concerned he was. "If you would allow me to have a seat, I'll fill you in." River showed him a chair and sat down on the couch. "What I'm about to tell you is confidential. Only Mona, myself, and now you will know this. 2 days before the quarantine, almost 3,000 people disappeared." He watched to see his reactions. He was shocked. Could the quarantine be a fake and only put in place to keep the people under watch? He wondered about the body count. In all that time, he had never seen anyone taken from any of the buildings on his street. He had never thought that Mona could lie, but being an artificial intelligence, she was far more than just a computer. "What does that have to do with me?" he asked. The inspector never stopped smiling. "To tell you the truth, I'm not entirely sure, but for some reason, Mona believes you're the one with the answers, or are able to come up with the answers. This is why she sent me." He reached inside his suit pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you, from Mona." He held it out to him. He reached out and took it. "Don't open it until I'm gone." He nodded his head in answer. "Oh, and I have a question. Have you ever heard of a young girl named Jasmine Emerson Maya, or a young man named Jeff James?" he asked as he stood up. "No, sorry, should I?" "Mostly no, but you will become familiar with them. I'm leaving the car at your disposal." He went to the door and opened it. "Thank you for your time, good sir." Out the door he went. He sat there looking at the envelope, not really wanting to open it. There was no reason why Mona should have picked him out of all of the city to deal with this. He got up and looked out the window at the rain. The car was still there. He wondered how the inspector had gotten back to wherever he had come from. He went to his computer, sat down, and opened the envelope. There was an ID card inside, with his picture on it, saying it was an all-access pass. He was not sure just what that meant. There was a sheet of paper that read, "Restart your computer. Log into your workspace using the password Mona says." His head began to spin when he logged in. He was given access to all the data that Mona had on every person in the city. There was videos with audio, there was wristband tracking data along with audio from home AIs. He had no clue that 4.5 million people in the city were being watched at this rate. He got up and looked out the window. For the next few hours, he learned who Jasmine Emerson Maya and Jeffrey James were. They were the last two that went missing, both about to go through merge just before they disappeared. That could be one of the things that all who disappeared had in common. He would have to check it out. For the next 2 days, he barely left the desk. But the information that he had compiled had shown him Mona had too much power. He didn't understand why Mona was so worried about 3,000 people disappearing when there was 4.5 million. It made little difference in the structure of society as far as he could see, and they were the type that would not fit in all the way anyways. There had to be more to it than people just disappearing in order for her to fake a quarantine. Was she thinking that more would go missing? One of the things he had noticed was the youth named James had contact with at least 25 or more of the ones that went missing. The more he looked into James, the more it showed he was some kind of recruit, but a recruit for what was the question. He wondered if the inspector had noticed this, or if he'd even had access to this information. Had Mona not trusted him with the information, or had he never been asked to look into any of this? On the third day, he had traced the wristbands of the ones who had contact with James and discovered they had all visited a game room on the south side around the time they went missing. Wristbands had been found at random places where there was no street cameras around the city. Whoever was doing it knew just where to put them. What was going on was a well-organized operation on the level as Mona. This could be why she was so worried about all this. Could there have been another AI out there wanting to take Mona out, he wondered. He looked into the history of the people and found out about 100 or so seemed to show new personal data at the same time as one of them went missing. He thought it strange that Mona had not noticed this, but after all, it was just numbers to her, so she could have overlooked them. They would take on a fake ID, and sometime before it too would disappear. He decided that he would have to take a visit to the south side. The game room was a good place to start. He wondered what his neighbors would think of him being able to go out during the quarantine. He looked out the window. It looked like a nice day out. "What's the temperature outside?" he asked. 76, and should reach 79, the high at 4 o'clock. No rain, wind 5 to 6 miles an hour from the northeast, the room's voice answered him. He checked to see who owned the game room, and seen that they were also missing, to no surprise to him. He synced his wristband with the computer before going out the door. When he reached the car, he looked up at the windows across the street and seen that a few people had noticed him. The back door opened as he approached. He got in and spoke the address. The car began to move. He had only been in a cab a couple of times, and it was nowhere near as nice as the city car. There was even a screen to watch TVs or movies, and he was sure it was connected to the city database. He was sure the game room had something to do with this. James had taken most of the ones he had contact with there at least one time, and some, like Jasmine, Emerson, Maya, a few times before they disappeared. He was sure that she plays a part in all of this, just didn't know how yet. He had learned that she was into history, and some of the files she had looked at were deleted. He was not sure by who, nor why they were. He wondered if Mona had done it, or even if she had known what was in the files. He was able to tell that a lot of them had to do with the early history of the city. He still had not figured out why Mona wanted him to look into this. Even though he was the only car on the road, it still took 45 minutes to reach the alleyway where the game room was. He had never thought just how big the city was before now. He got out of the car and walked down the alley to the green door. If he didn't know it was there, he would never have found it. There was no sign to say it was a game room. He pulled out the ID card and held it up. There was a click and the door was unlocked. He pushed it open. It was dark inside. He stepped just inside and said, "Lights?" The room lit up. He was surprised at how big it was. There had to be near 200 game stations, each with 2 or more seats for players. He slowly made his way to the back wall where the counter for renting the stations was. To the left was a rather large restaurant. From the information he had read, the place had been open 24/7, so it must have made a nice profit. He looked behind the counter and found a series of pegs. All but the last one had numbered discs hanging from them. Hanging on the last one was a wristband.
He removed it, looked at the number. It was the owners of the game room's band. This was strange. Why was this the only one here? Were all the other pegs for other bands? If so, why? Did they come into the game room, hand over their wristbands, and receive a numbered disc? Could it be so Mona was not able to track them? But where would they have gone? Mona would have known that if they came out of the game room with the cameras on the streets, even without the wristbands, she would see anyone leaving the alleyway. He took a quick look at the restaurant and was surprised that there was 3 walk-in freezers. They were all empty. Where was all the food that a restaurant this size would have had to keep on hand? He wondered just how much food would have been in them. Would it have been enough to feed a couple of thousand people for a month or two? He really didn't think so, but maybe a week or two. He went back out into the game room. The answer to where they had all went had to be here somewhere, he thought. He looked at the row of stations and tried to imagine them being used. He was sure that most who came there had been younger than merge age. He spoke to his wristband. "Can you show me a list of the last 25 people that entered the place?" Just above his wrist in the air, the list showed. As he thought, not far from the top was James and Jasmine. "Can you tell me which station Jeff James used last?" The letters in the air changed to Station 33. "Power up Station 33. The lights on the station lit up. He walked over to it. After a moment of looking it over, he noticed there was a little difference than the rest. Station 33 was sitting on a 4-inch platform above the floor from the rest of the stations. He found this odd, so he got down on his knees to take a look. He noticed that the platform was not even touching the floor. He stood back up, scratching his head. It was designed to move. That was the only explanation. He sat down in the first player's seat. The screen in front of him lit up with the words, "Welcome to." Then it changed to the picture of a city and the words, "The Intercity." Okay, he thought, what the hell? He pushed the start button. He felt the seat begin to vibrate, and then the screen in front of him moved up as the platform slowly moved forward. Once it had moved into the opening, he heard the screen behind him come down. Then he felt the platform move down. It was some kind of elevator, he realized. He was impressed at how well organized this operation was. After a moment it stopped. The wall in front of him raised up and the platform moved out into a large room, 2 or 3 times as big as the game room. The place smelled of overuse by people, he thought. There was trash all over the place, and it had the look of being used for a long time. As he looked around, he got the feeling this was a common area. There were many halls leading away from this area. He thought that was where the living quarters would be. He was sure he had found where the people had disappeared to for a time, but where were they now? As he looked around, he found a door that was marked private. It was locked, so he held up his ID card and it unlocked for him. It opened onto a hallway with a dozen or so doors. Each was marked. He looked at each one of them, but the one at the end of the hall made him stop dead in his tracks. In big bold letters it said Mona, and under that was Master of Natural Awareness. Wow, he thought. This was getting a little creepy. Mona did seem to be Master of Awareness as far as the city was concerned. He opened the door, being surprised it was unlocked. The room was dark except a circle of light about 25 feet away from the door. It was shining down on some kind of glass cabinet with all kinds of flashing lights inside. He wondered if this was really Mona or not, or maybe one of the many terminals she had. The rest of the room was so dark he could not tell how big it was, but he got the feeling it was huge. He walked over to the glass cabinet, seeing there was a keyboard sticking out of one side as he heard the door open. He looked over at it in time to see a silhouette of a man enter. The door closed and he could not see anything. "Who's there?" he said nervously. "No cause for alarm. It's Inspector Darren." He walked into the edge of the circle of light. He was pointing a gun at him. He looked at the gun and then at the inspector. Why the gun? He was smiling. Let's say it's for Mona's safety. He didn't know what to say. He just stood there looking at him. Was he afraid that he could do some kind of damage to Mona from here? I didn't think Mona knew what she was doing when she had you look into the missing. The inspector kind of giggled. I'm sure you are wondering why you. Well, you see, you happen to be the last living relative of the man who had programmed Mona. And she thought if anyone could find the lost terminal, you could. I say it was just luck. Had she given me the same information, I would have found it days ago. So it was never about the missing people. It was about finding this. He pointed at the glass cabinet. That's right. And now that you have fulfilled your use to Mona, you are no longer needed. He raised the gun up. Out of the dark, a young man's voice said, If you know what's good for you, you won't do that. The inspector's smile never changed, nor did his aim. You think I'm afraid of a boy's voice in the dark? From the other side of the room, a young female voice said, The dark could hold many voices. Put down your gun and step back, the male voice said, and get on your knees. He slowly lowered the gun, then tossed it on the floor. He put his hands behind his head and said, I'm not getting on my knees for no one. From the dark, the young man came into the light holding a bow with an arrow pointed at the inspector. Smart move, Inspector Darren. We have been expecting you for some time now. Mr. Tones, would you be so kind as to handcuff him? It took River a minute to get them on the inspector. He had never even seen a set before. He backed away as the young woman came into the light. She too held a bow pointed at the inspector. He wondered how they knew their names. He knew who they were from their pictures. It was Jeff James and Jasmine Emerson Maya. You do know who we are? James asked. He nodded his head. Good, that will save us some time. We knew that Mona would be looking for the programming terminal. We had hoped to get here before now, but was unable to. We saw that you were on the way to the game room, so we decided to wait, knowing the inspector would follow you. Why are you here? Why come back from wherever you went? I'm sure you didn't come back to save me. Jasmine moved over to him. We are here to stop Mona. She pointed at the terminal. This is the only place our programming can be changed. The human race has a right to live free, and we intend to see that it has a choice to do just that. You can't do that. The city will crash. Countless will die, the inspector almost yelled. River agreed with him, but the price for freedom was never cheap. The city will be fine. The systems will still work. The only difference is Mona will not be there to run everything. People will have to step up and take control over their own lives, James said. Jasmine pulled out a small notebook. This code will lock Mona into a self-diagnosis with no end. Once added, it will take a couple hours to lock her down. It's kind of a digital prison. Then we will destroy the terminal. Wow, River thought. They were determined to rid the city of Mona's control, and he thought it was the right thing to do after what he had seen the last few days. My ancestors created Mona. Would you be willing to let me put the code in to end this? River said it without even thinking about it. Jasmine looked at James, who nodded his head. Once done, you and the inspector are welcome to join us outside the city walls, she said. River shook his head. I'm not going anywhere. The city will need leaders, and I'm sure the inspector will agree that people will need all they hope they can get. I have the only password to access the whole system. She handed him the notebook, and 10 minutes later he pushed the last key. Make your way out. You have about 15 minutes before this place is as hot as the sun. It's not going to be easy for the people who live without Mona making all the hard choices, but mankind will know what is best for the human race in the long run. Jasmine smiled at him. He took the inspector by the arm and headed to the door. Let's go start a new life for the people of the city. He led him through the door. When they had almost reached River's home, He found the keys to the handcuff and let the inspector loose, who looked at him a moment and then asked, "You're letting me go?" River nodded his head. "Yes, I believe you were just doing what you thought was right to do for Mona. I don't blame you for that. That kind of loyalty is going to be needed in the days to come. You're the highest ranking law officer. I also know that there will be a need for more officers, and who better to lead them than you?" He could see him thinking hard about what to say. "Okay, but you'll have to agree to take the position of the at least temporary mayor for now." The inspector held out his hand and shook it. River noticed for the first time the inspector was not smiling.